On a Tuesday evening in March of 1981, a small Italian restaurant on the corner of Ventura Boulevard and Coldwater Canyon in Studio City, California, held exactly 23 customers. The dinner rush had passed. The busboy had already wiped down 4 of the back tables. A candle in a wine bottle burned low at table 11. And the smell of garlic bread and espresso moved through the room in slow, unhurried waves. 3 men entered at 8:47 in the evening. They were not there for the food. The first man was 26 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and carried 210 pounds on a frame that had spent 4 years doing manual labor at a shipping warehouse in Van Nuys. He had done 14 months in Chino for aggravated assault. He knew how to use his size, and he knew that most people, when faced with a man of his dimensions holding a firearm, made a very simple calculation and stepped aside. He was right about most people. The second man was 24, 5 feet 11, fast on his feet. He had grown up fencing stolen goods in the San Fernando Valley and had graduated, in the preceding 2 years, to armed robbery. He had participated in 11 of them. Not one had gone wrong. The third was 22 and had never been arrested. He was the one who had scouted the location. He had sat at the bar 2 nights earlier with a glass of water and a notepad and counted the tables, the exits, the staff. He had noted that the owner kept the register near the front and that the walk-in safe in the back office stayed unlocked until 9 o'clock. He had done his homework. What he had not noted, because the man had arrived after he left, was the figure sitting alone at a corner table near the emergency exit, eating a bowl of minestrone and reading a newspaper. The man at the corner table was 39 years old. He was wearing a gray cotton shirt, dark trousers, and a pair of ordinary brown shoes. He had no jacket. He had set a folded denim cap on the table beside his bread plate when he sat down, and it rested there, perfectly squared at the edges, as if someone had placed it with a ruler. He had not shaved in 3 days. There was nothing about his appearance that would have told a careful observer anything useful about who he was or what he had spent the last 20 years learning to do. His name was Carlos Ray Norris. The people who knew him called him Chuck. In 11 seconds, 3 armed men were going to discover something that the United States Air Force, the Korean military establishment, and the entire professional martial arts circuit of North America already understood to be true about the quiet man at that corner table. Not a single person in that restaurant, at 8:47 on a Tuesday evening in March of 1981, understood what they were about to see. They would not understand it in the moment it happened. Some of them would spend the rest of their lives trying to find the language to explain it to people who were not there. The first man through the door pulled the weapon at the threshold. It was a .38 caliber revolver, and he held it at chest height, aimed at the room in general, the way a man holds something he expects to be obeyed. His voice was loud enough to be heard at every table. He told everyone to get down. The second man moved immediately to the register. The third went toward the back hallway where the office sat behind a hollow core door. 22 of the 23 customers in that restaurant moved exactly as instructed. Chuck Norris set down his spoon. He did not get up immediately. He did not look at the gunman directly. He looked at the candle on the table across from him and watched the flame for a moment, the way a man watches weather moving across a valley, reading it. Then he folded his newspaper once neatly along its original crease and placed it beside the denim cap. He already understood the room. He had understood it since the moment the door opened. He knew where each of the 3 men was standing. He knew the distance from his chair to the nearest one. He knew the angle. He knew what the man with the revolver could see from where he was positioned and what he could not. He stood up without hurry. Chuck Norris had earned his first black belt in Tang Soo Do in 1962 while stationed in South Korea with the United States Air Force. He had spent the years between then and this evening building a body of knowledge about violence that very few people on earth possessed. He had trained under men who had spent their lives in rooms where the question was not whether someone would try to hurt you but simply when, and how, and from which direction. He had opened his own chain of martial arts schools. He had competed at the highest levels of professional full-contact karate and retired with a record that his contemporaries in the sport could recite from memory. He had been training actors in controlled violence on film sets for the better part of a decade. He was not a large man. He stood 5 feet 10 inches. He weighed 172 pounds on that particular evening, because he had weighed himself that morning on the scale in his home gym in Chatsworth, and the number had not changed from the week before. He was not the biggest person in the room by a measurement that would have mattered to most people assessing a situation like this one. He was, by any reasonable accounting, the most dangerous person on Ventura Boulevard at that moment. He was possibly the most dangerous person in Studio City. The man with the revolver had not done his homework the way the third man had. If you want to find out what happened in the next 30 seconds of that evening, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from tonight. Chuck Norris crossed the distance between his corner table and the front of the restaurant in 7 steps. He walked at an ordinary pace. He did not run. Running changes the geometry of what comes next, and he understood geometry the way a surgeon understands anatomy, not as theory but as material fact. A fight is not chaos. A fight is a conversation about distance, conducted in fractions of a second, and the man who controls the distance controls the conversation. The man with the revolver saw him moving and began to adjust the weapon toward him. That adjustment took 1.5 seconds. In that time, Chuck Norris covered the remaining 4 feet of ground and changed the equation entirely. Second one. His left hand came across the line of the weapon, not at it but past it, redirecting the barrel outward by a matter of degrees. The precise angle was 11 degrees. Those 11 degrees were the difference between the revolver pointing at the room and the revolver pointing at the wall. The difference between those two outcomes was the entire weight of what was about to follow. Second 2. The weapon cleared his body centerline. The man holding it had not yet understood what was happening. His grip tightened on the handle, which was the natural response, and the natural response was the wrong one. Tightening his grip meant his wrist locked. A locked wrist telegraphs. It removes options. Chuck Norris had already registered the lock before the man's hand fully completed it. Second 3. The revolver left the man's hand. It did not leave it violently, in the cinematic sense that word usually implies. It left it through the application of a wrist release technique that Chuck Norris had drilled approximately 9,000 times over the preceding decade, beginning on the mat of a dojo in Gardena in 1965, and continuing through 2 wars, 4 weight classes, and a film career. The revolver was in Chuck Norris's left hand before the man with the warehouse build had registered that it was no longer in his own. Every person in that restaurant who had their eyes open, and after the first second all of them did, froze at the same instant. The owner of the restaurant was standing behind the bar holding a dish towel he had been folding when the men came through the door. He stopped folding it. He held it in both hands, motionless for the remainder of what followed. A woman at table 7 had been raising a glass of Chianti to her lips. The glass stopped exactly at the level of her chin, and did not move again until it was over. The busboy, who was 17 years old, and had come to the United States from Jalisco 18 months earlier, and who had, until that moment, been standing in the kitchen doorway watching the scene with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that visibility is sometimes dangerous, gripped the doorframe with both hands and did not release it. The second man, who had been at the register, turned at the sound of motion and saw his partner standing empty-handed in the center of the room with Chuck Norris 4 feet in front of him. He made a decision. It was a poor one. He moved toward Chuck Norris from a distance of 12 feet. He covered 6 of those feet before Chuck Norris turned at the hips and removed him from the situation with a single motion that the people who witnessed it would later describe in 3 or 4 different ways, depending on who they were and what they had seen before and how honest they were about the speed at which it had happened. The motion involved the outside of his right forearm and the second man's forward momentum, and a principle that has been understood in Korean martial arts for approximately 7 centuries, that a man moving toward you at speed is doing most of your work for you. The second man sat down on the floor of the restaurant. He did not get up. The third man had come back from the hallway. He stood in the doorway to the back corridor and took in the scene in front of him. His partner was on the floor. His partner's partner was standing with his hands slightly raised in the universal posture of a man who has decided to reconsider his evening. The man in the gray cotton shirt was facing him from the center of the room with the revolver now held at his side barrel down. With the ease of a man who has set down a cup of coffee, he looked at Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris looked at him. The third man understood several things in the following 2 seconds that his homework 2 nights earlier had not prepared him to understand. He understood that whatever calculation he had made about this restaurant and this evening had been made without a variable that should have been central to every calculation he had made about everything in his life up to this point. He understood that the gray-shirted man in the brown shoes was operating by a set of rules that had nothing to do with the rules he had been using. He understood with a clarity that tends to arrive in moments of genuine physical fear that he was not equipped for this particular room on this particular evening. He set his own weapon on the floor of the hallway. He did it carefully. He straightened up. He put his hands where they could be seen. Chuck Norris walked toward him slowly. He stopped 2 feet away. He said something to the man in a voice that was quiet enough that the owner behind the bar, who was 8 feet away, could not make out the words. Whatever he said, it was short. It was said once. The third man, who was 22 years old, and who it would later be established, had a younger sister in Reseda he was sending $50 a week to from the proceeds of 11 armed robberies. Nodded once. The choice in front of the 3 men in the following minutes was not complicated. 2 of them, eventually, were honest about what had happened. One of them, in the way of men who cannot afford to be honest even with themselves, found other language for it over the years. Chuck Norris held the 3 men in the restaurant until the police arrived. The officers who responded to the call noted in their report that upon arrival, 2 of the subjects were seated on the floor against the west wall, and one was seated in a booth near the back with his hands flat on the table. They noted that a third party, identified as the individual who had contained the situation before their arrival, was seated at a corner table near the emergency exit. Finishing a bowl of soup, he had picked the bowl back up when it was over. The owner of the restaurant walked over to him when the police had taken the 3 men out to the sidewalk. He was a man of 61 who had come to the United States from Naples in 1953 and who had worked in kitchens for 22 years before he had enough money to own one. He put his hand on Chuck Norris's shoulder as he passed the corner table. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The hand said what needed to be said, and Chuck Norris gave him a short nod, and the old man from Naples moved on. The busboy from Jalisco told the story for the rest of his life. He told it to his children and his grandchildren, and to every person who ever worked alongside him in a kitchen. The details changed, as details do when a story travels through time, and through the mouths of people who are trying to do justice to something they know they witnessed but cannot quite fully explain. In some versions the number of men grew. In some versions the revolver became something larger. In every version the man at the corner table finished his soup. Chuck Norris did not give an interview about the evening. He did not discuss it in the memoir he would publish years later. He went home that night and trained the following morning at the same time he trained every morning, which was 5:45. And he has said in other contexts that the measure of a man's character is not what he does in the moment that everyone is watching, but what he returns to in the morning when the room is empty and the work still needs doing. The 3 men who entered that restaurant on a Tuesday evening in March of 1981 were looking for something easy. They had 17 successful robberies behind them, collectively, and they had built from that record a particular confidence about their place in certain kinds of situations. They were skilled, in the way that people who have practiced one thing without opposition for long enough become skilled. They had simply never been measured against the right opposition. And that is the oldest lesson available to anyone willing to pay attention to it, that the absence of a challenge is not the same thing as the presence of ability. A wall you have never hit is not a wall you can walk through. It is simply a wall you have not met yet. Next week, we will talk about the evening in 1979 when Bruce Lee's former student walked into Chuck Norris's school in Sherman Oaks with a challenge that the 30 students on the mat that night have never forgotten. That story has been told in whispers for 40 years. Next week, we tell it here.